The emergency alarm screamed through the crystalline corridors of the draconian mothership Eternal Flame as Captain Zarathes clutched her wounded side. Purple blood seeped between her scaled fingers while she stumbled toward the bridge. The massive white dragon that had raised her from a hatchling was dying, and there was nothing the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy could do about it. Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck, his human hands pressed against the transparent aluminum viewing port. Below him in the ship's medical bay, the ancient white dragon Lysandra lay motionless on a platform designed for beings 10 times larger than any human. Her once brilliant scales had dulled to the color of old snow, and her breathing came in ragged, painful gasps. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, the only human aboard a ship full of beings who considered his species little more than clever animals, watching the one creature who had seen something more in him slowly fade away. Lysandra had found him as a child on the burned remains of the human colony ship New Hope, the sole survivor of a Void Reaper attack. While other dragons would have left him to die or killed him outright, she had taken him in. "The neural pathways are shutting down," announced Dr. Vexhai, the ship's chief medical officer. His reptilian voice carried the weight of defeat. "The poison has reached her central nervous system. Even our most advanced nanobots cannot reverse this level of cellular damage." Marcus closed his eyes and remembered the day Lysandra had first spoken to him telepathically. He had been 7 years old, hiding in the ventilation shafts of her personal quarters, stealing food scraps. Instead of punishment, he had felt her ancient mind touch his with surprising gentleness. "Why do you hide, little one?" her voice had whispered in his thoughts. "Because I'm different," he had replied, not understanding how the words formed in his mind. "Because I don't belong here." "Neither did I once," she had said. "But belonging is not given. It is earned." Now 23 years later, Marcus was no longer the frightened child hiding in the walls. He had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a human raised by dragons trained in their ways and trusted with their most sacred knowledge. The Draconian High Council had initially protested his presence, but Lysandra's influence had been absolute. She was a matriarch, one of the oldest and most powerful dragons in existence. The ship shuddered as another wave of enemy fire struck their shields. The Void Reapers had found them, drawn by the distress signal that had automatically activated when Lysandra collapsed. These creatures of living shadow and nightmare fed on the life force of sentient beings, and a dying matriarch was a feast they could not resist. "Shields at 60%, reported Commander Thexion from the bridge. "They're focusing their attacks on the medical bay section." "They know she's here." Marcus felt his jaw clench. The Void Reapers weren't just trying to destroy the ship. They were trying to devour Lysandra while she was helpless. It was a fate worse than death, one that would condemn her consciousness to an eternity of torment within their hive mind. He turned away from the viewing port and walked through the corridors with purpose. Dragons moved aside as he passed, their vertical pupils tracking his movement with a mixture of respect and curiosity. He had grown tall for a human, nearly 6.5 feet, and his time among the dragons had given him a predatory grace that made others instinctively step back. The armory was sealed with quantum locks that required both genetic markers and psychic imprints to open. Marcus placed his hand on the scanner and felt the familiar tingle as it read his hybrid neural patterns. Lysandra had done more than simply raise him. She had shared her memories, her knowledge, and even fragments of her essence. The scanner recognized him as family. Inside the armory lay weapons that had been forged in the heart of dying stars, armor that could withstand the fury of black holes, and technologies that most species would kill entire civilizations to possess. But Marcus walked past all of these to a simple metal case in the back corner. Inside was something that shouldn't have existed, a piece of human technology that Lysandra had salvaged from the New Hope before its final destruction. The quantum resonance amplifier was barely larger than his fist, a crystalline device that human scientists had developed to enhance psychic abilities in the rare individuals who possessed them. Humans weren't naturally telepathic like dragons, but Lysandra had discovered that Marcus carried dormant genes that could be awakened under the right circumstances. "You're planning something incredibly stupid, aren't you?" Zarathes had entered the armory behind him, her purple blood now staunched but her scales pale with pain. Marcus looked at the dragon who had been his closest friend and rival throughout their childhood. She was young by dragon standards, barely 300 years old, but she commanded respect through skill rather than age. Her scales were a deep emerald green that shifted to blue in certain light, and her eyes held an intelligence that had intimidated enemy commanders across the galaxy. "Lysandra is dying," Marcus said simply. "The Void Reapers are coming for her. I won't let that happen." "And what exactly do you think you can do that our weapons cannot?" Zarathus demanded. "You're human, Marcus. You're brave and clever, and I would trust you with my life. But this is beyond your capabilities." Marcus activated the amplifier, feeling it sync with the neural pathways that Lysandra had carefully cultivated in his mind over the years. Energy coursed through his consciousness, awakening parts of his brain that human evolution had never intended to use. "Lysandra taught me that belonging isn't given," he said, his voice taking on harmonics that resonated with draconic vocal cords. "It's earned. Today I'm going to earn my place in this family." The ship rocked again as the Void Reapers pressed their attack. Through the walls, Marcus could feel their hunger, their alien malevolence focused on the dying matriarch. But he could also feel something else. The vast network of quantum entanglement that connected every dragon to their ancestral memory. A psychic web that spanned the galaxy and touched every member of their species. Lysandra had given him access to that network years ago, marking him as family in ways that went deeper than blood or species. Now he was going to use that connection in a way that no one had ever attempted before. "What are you doing?" Zarathus whispered, her eyes widening as she sensed the psychic energy building around him. Marcus smiled, and for a moment, his eyes flickered with the golden fire that marked a true dragon. "I'm going to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten my mother." The quantum resonance amplifier pulsed with increasing intensity as Marcus made his way to the ship's central core. Every step sent waves of psychic energy rippling through the crystalline corridors, causing the bioluminescent panels to flicker and dim. Dragons throughout the ship stopped what they were doing, their ancient instincts recognizing something that shouldn't be possible, a human mind touching the edges of their ancestral network. In the medical bay, Lysandra's massive head lifted slightly, her clouded eyes finding focus for the first time in hours. Through their bond, she felt what Marcus was attempting, and terror flooded her consciousness. Not for herself, but for the young human she had raised as her own child. "No, little star," her mental voice whispered across the connection, using the pet name she had given him so long ago. "The network will consume you." Human minds are not built for this, but Marcus had already committed to his path. The central core of the eternal flame was a sphere of pure energy suspended in a gravitational field, the ship's quantum heart that powered everything from life support to faster-than-light travel. More importantly, it was directly connected to the galactic network that linked every dragon across the known universe. "Sir, you cannot enter the core chamber," protested Engineer Kethmos, a young dragon whose bronze scales marked her as barely past her first century. "The radiation levels alone would kill most species in seconds." Marcus didn't slow down. The amplifier had synchronized with his neural patterns completely now, and he could feel Lysandra's memories flowing through him like a river of liquid fire. He experienced her first flight across the crystalline canyons of Draconum Prime, felt the weight of command when she became a matriarch, shared her grief when the Void Reapers had first appeared in their galaxy 3,000 years ago. The containment field around the core chamber recognized his genetic markers and dissolved, allowing him to step into a space that should have been instantly lethal, but the amplifier wasn't just enhancing his psychic abilities. It was rewriting his cellular structure in real time, using Lysandra's own genetic template as a guide. His human DNA was adapting, evolving, becoming something new. Outside the ship, the Void Reapers had formed a living cloud of shadow and hunger around the eternal flame. Their forms defied easy description, shifting between states of matter and energy. But their intent was clear. They could sense the dying matriarch within, could taste her fear and pain across the vacuum of space. For creatures that fed on consciousness itself, she represented a feast that would sustain them for centuries. The largest of the Reapers, an entity that called itself the Devourer of Light, pressed against the ship's shields with tendrils of living darkness. It had consumed the minds of entire civilizations, had watched species rise and fall over millennia. But the dying dragon within this vessel represented something special. Matriarchs were rare, their consciousness vast and complex, seasoned by millennia of experience. Soon it whispered to its lesser brethren, Soon we feast on ancient memories. Inside the core chamber, Marcus placed his hands directly on the energy sphere at the ship's heart. The moment his skin made contact, pain beyond human comprehension flooded his nervous system. The quantum field was designed to interface with dragon physiology, not human biology, and every cell in his body screamed in protest, but he held on, feeling his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his individual mind. Through the ship's quantum core, he touched the edge of something vast and ancient, the collective memory of an entire species, stretching back to the dawn of their civilization. Every dragon that had ever lived, every thought they had shared, every moment of triumph and tragedy, all of it existed in this network of quantum-entangled consciousness. The network recoiled from his presence like an immune system rejecting a foreign invader. Human minds weren't meant to touch this sacred space, weren't evolved to process the weight of such vast experience. But Marcus pushed deeper, using Lysandra's memories as a guide, following the quantum pathways she had shown him in their private moments together. He found her consciousness easily, a brilliant star of white fire dimming at the network's edge. The poison was working its way through her system, shutting down neural pathways one by one, but her mind remained intact. Around her, he sensed the presence of other matriarchs, ancient beings who had gathered to witness her passing and welcome her into the final embrace of the collective memory. "You should not be here." Young human, spoke a voice like the rumble of tectonic plates. It belonged to Thessarian the Eternal, the oldest of all dragons, whose consciousness had been part of the network for over 10,000 years. "Lysandra is my mother," Marcus replied, his thoughts carrying harmonics he had learned by listening to dragon speech for over 2 decades. "I will not abandon family." The network shuddered around him as every connected consciousness focused on this unprecedented intrusion. Dragons across the galaxy felt the disturbance, their meditation broken by the impossible presence of a human mind in their most sacred space. Some called for his immediate expulsion, viewing his presence as blasphemy. Others, intrigued by his connection to Lysandra, demanded to examine this curiosity more closely. But Thessarian's ancient mind studied Marcus with something approaching wonder. "You carry her essence within you. How is this possible?" Through the network, Marcus shared his memories, the years of careful mental conditioning, the gradual integration of draconic neural patterns into his developing human brain, the slow transformation that had made him something unique in galactic history. He showed them the day Lysandra had first shared her memories with him, how she had carefully woven fragments of her own consciousness into his mind, to give him the tools he would need to survive among her people. "She made him family in truth," whispered another ancient voice, "bound him to our network through bonds of love rather than blood." The debate among the matriarchs was interrupted by a wave of darkness that swept through the network. The Void Reapers had begun their assault on the ship's quantum core, sending tendrils of hungry shadow through the energy fields. They could sense the gathered consciousness within the network, and sought to devour not just Lysandra, but every mind connected to her at the moment of her death. "They come for us all," Thessarian observed with grim calm. "The network itself is at risk." Marcus felt the fear ripple through the connected minds, saw the defensive protocols beginning to activate as dragons across the galaxy prepared to sever their connections rather than risk contamination by the Reapers. If they disconnected now, Lysandra would die alone, cut off from her people in her final moments. That was when Marcus made his choice, the decision that would change everything. Instead of retreating from the network as his human instincts screamed at him to do, he opened his mind completely. Every memory, every experience, every moment of his life, he shared it all with the collective consciousness of the dragon race. They saw through his eyes the day Lysandra found him in the wreckage of his colony ship, a terrified child clinging to the burned corpse of his mother. They felt his confusion and loneliness as he struggled to find his place among beings so different from himself. They experienced his wonder as Lysandra taught him to see the universe through dragon eyes, showing him the beauty in quantum mechanics and the poetry in stellar formation. But most importantly, they felt his love, not the instinctive affection of a child for a caregiver, but the deep, abiding devotion of someone who had chosen his family rather than simply being born into it. Marcus had spent over 20 years proving himself worthy of Lysandra's trust, earning his place through dedication and sacrifice. "He is truly her child," Thessarian declared, his ancient voice carrying the weight of final judgment. Bound by choice rather than biology, the network accepts him. The collective consciousness of the dragon race embraced Marcus, welcoming him as the first non-dragon to ever join their sacred network. Power flowed through him, knowledge accumulated over millions of years, techniques and abilities that no human had ever possessed. But with that power came responsibility, and Marcus knew exactly how he intended to use it. The Void Reapers were about to discover what happened when someone threatened a dragon's family. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. As the dragon network fully accepted Marcus, his human physiology began to change in ways that defied every law of biology he had ever learned. The quantum resonance amplifier, originally designed to enhance psychic abilities, became a conduit for something far more profound. His cellular structure rewrote itself at the molecular level, incorporating genetic patterns from every dragon consciousness he touched. Captain Zarathes felt the shift through her empathic connection to Marcus, a bond forged through years of friendship and shared danger. She abandoned her position on the bridge and raced toward the core chamber, her injured side forgotten in the face of her growing alarm. What she found there defied explanation. Marcus stood at the center of the quantum core, no longer entirely human. His skin had taken on a subtle scaled pattern that shifted between flesh and something harder, more resilient. His eyes blazed with golden fire, the same inner light that marked the most powerful dragons. Most unsettling of all, shadows moved around him that seemed to have substance and intelligence of their own. "Marcus," she whispered, but he didn't respond. His consciousness was fully engaged with the network, experiencing the collective memories of every dragon that had ever lived. Through him, they were analyzing the Void Reapers with a perspective no single mind could achieve. The Reapers had been a mystery for 3,000 years, appearing without warning to consume the consciousness of entire species before vanishing into the dark spaces between galaxies. They seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime, making them nearly impossible to track or predict. But now, with Marcus serving as a bridge between human intuition and draconic wisdom, patterns began to emerge. They are not native to this universe. Thessarian's ancient voice echoed through the network. They come from a realm where consciousness itself is the primary form of matter and energy. Through Marcus's enhanced perception, the Dragon Collective examined the Reaper's quantum signatures, analyzing the exotic matter that comprised their forms. What they discovered sent ripples of shock through every connected mind. The Void Reapers weren't just predators. They were refugees, fleeing some catastrophe in their home dimension that had forced them to seek sustenance in the physical universe. Their realm is dying, Marcus realized, his transformed consciousness processing information at speeds that would have been impossible for his original human brain. They're not evil. They're desperate. They need consciousness to survive. But they don't understand that what they're doing destroys what they're trying to preserve. This revelation changed everything. For 3 millennia, the galaxy's species had viewed the Reapers as an implacable enemy, beings of pure malevolence that could only be destroyed. But Marcus saw something else. Creatures driven by the same primal need for survival that motivated every living being. Outside the ship, the Devourer of Light had begun to break through the Eternal Flame's shields. Its massive form, composed of living shadow and hungry void, pressed against the hull with increasing pressure. Through the breach, smaller Reapers poured in like liquid darkness, flowing through the corridors and seeking the source of the consciousness they could sense within. Dragons throughout the ship engaged them with weapons of crystallized starfire and armor, forged from the cores of dead planets. But their attacks barely slowed the invaders. The Reapers existed partially outside normal space, making them nearly immune to conventional weapons. Worse, every moment of contact with them weakened the defenders as the creatures fed on their life force. "All hands, fall back to emergency positions," Commander Thexion ordered as shadow things swarmed through the bridge. "Seal the core chamber and protect the matriarch at all costs." But the emergency bulkheads couldn't stop beings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Reapers flowed through solid matter like water, driven by an insatiable hunger for the consciousness they could sense gathering around Lysandra's dying form. In the medical bay, Dr. Vexhai and his staff had erected a perimeter of psychic dampening fields, hoping to mask Lysandra's presence from the invaders. But the ancient matriarch was too powerful, her consciousness too vast to hide completely. She lay motionless on the medical platform, her breathing growing weaker with each passing moment, while shadows gathered at the edges of the chamber. "Let them come," she whispered through the network to Marcus. "I am ready to join the eternal memory. Do not risk yourself for an old dragon's pride." But Marcus had no intention of letting her go without a fight. Through the network, he reached out to every dragon connected to the collective consciousness, drawing on their combined knowledge and experience. He learned techniques that had been forgotten for millennia, accessed memories of battles fought against entities from dimensions beyond imagining. Most importantly, he remembered something from his human childhood, a lesson his biological mother had taught him before her death in the colony ship attack. She had been a xenobiologist, one of the few humans who specialized in understanding alien forms of life. Her words echoed through his transformed consciousness. "Every living thing has needs, Marcus. Even the strangest creatures are just trying to survive in their own way." "Zara," he said suddenly, his voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline walls of the core chamber resonate. "I need you to do something that's going to sound insane." The emerald dragon moved closer, her vertical pupils dilated with concern. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to try to communicate with them," Marcus replied, his golden eyes blazing with determination. "The Reapers aren't just mindless predators. They're intelligent, desperate, and they're making a mistake that's going to destroy both them and us if we don't find another way." "Communicate?" Zarathus stared at him in disbelief. "Marcus, they consume consciousness. The moment you open your mind to them, they'll devour everything you are." "Not if I approach them correctly," he said, his transformed physiology allowing him to interface directly with the ship's quantum systems. "Dragons have always been solitary creatures, but humans are social. We understand cooperation in ways that most species don't. Maybe that's what's needed here." Through the network, he felt the ancient matriarchs observing his plan with a mixture of fascination and horror. What he was proposing had never been attempted before, and the risks were enormous. If he failed, the Reapers would gain access to the entire dragon network through his compromised consciousness. "The young human shows wisdom beyond his years," the Sarian observed. "But the danger he courts could doom us all." And yet, another ancient voice added, "His approach offers possibilities we have never considered. Perhaps it is time to try something other than war." Marcus felt their permission flow through the network, along with protective protocols that would sever his connection instantly if the Reapers began to corrupt his consciousness. It was a risk they were willing to take, if only because 3,000 years of conventional warfare had accomplished nothing except the deaths of countless billions. He began to extend his awareness beyond the ship, reaching out into the void where the Reapers waited. What he found there was even more disturbing than he had expected. The creatures weren't just hungry. They were terrified, desperate refugees clinging to existence in a universe that wasn't meant to sustain their kind. Their home dimension was, indeed, dying, collapsing in on itself as some cosmic catastrophe drained away the consciousness energy that served as the foundation of their reality. They had come to the physical universe as a last resort, not understanding that the consciousness they needed to survive was intimately connected to the living beings that generated it. Every time they consumed a mind, they destroyed the very thing they were trying to preserve. It was like trying to feed a fire by burning the wood that produced the flames. They were slowly starving themselves while simultaneously eliminating their only food source. "They don't understand," Marcus realized with growing excitement. "They think consciousness is just energy to be harvested, but it's not. It's a process, something that has to be maintained and nurtured. They're trying to eat the music instead of learning to play the instruments." This revelation gave him the key he needed. If he could show the Reapers how consciousness actually worked, demonstrate that it could be shared and enhanced rather than simply consumed, there might be a way to save both species from extinction. But first, he had to survive direct contact with beings that had devoured the minds of entire civilizations. As the first tendrils of shadow reached the core chamber, Marcus prepared to attempt something that would either save the galaxy or doom it forever. The first Void Reaper to enter the core chamber was smaller than the others, barely the size of a human torso, but its presence filled the room with a suffocating darkness that seemed to drain light itself from the air. Zarathus instinctively moved to intercept it, her scales beginning to glow with the internal fire that marked a dragon preparing for battle, but Marcus raised his hand to stop her. "Don't," he said quietly, his transformed voice carrying an authority that made even her ancient instincts pause. "Let it come to me." The Reaper flowed across the chamber floor like liquid shadow, its form constantly shifting between states of matter and energy. As it drew closer, Marcus could feel its hunger pressing against his consciousness, probing for weaknesses, seeking entry points into his mind. But instead of resisting, he did something unprecedented. He opened himself to its touch. The moment of contact was agony beyond description. The Reaper's consciousness was alien in ways that defied comprehension, existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously, experiencing time and space in patterns that no three-dimensional being could fully grasp. It was like trying to understand the ocean by examining a single drop of water, except the ocean was composed of pure thought and the drop contained the experiences of an entire species. Food. The creature's mind whispered as it began to probe his consciousness. Rich food, complex patterns, so much to consume. But as it delved deeper into Marcus's mind, seeking the neural pathways that would allow it to drain his life force, something unexpected happened. Instead of the simple linear thought patterns it expected from a single consciousness, it found something far more complex. The entire dragon network, accessible through Marcus's hybrid neural structure. The Reaper recoiled in shock, its shadowy form rippling with confusion. It had never encountered a mind that was simultaneously individual and collective, a consciousness that existed both as a single entity and as part of a vast, interconnected whole. Through Marcus, it could sense the thoughts and memories of thousands of dragons spanning millions of years. But they weren't separate minds to be consumed. They were facets of a single enormous consciousness that defied its understanding of how awareness could exist. "What are you?" the Reaper asked, its mental voice carrying harmonics of fear for the first time in millennia. "I am what you could become," Marcus replied, his consciousness remaining calm despite the alien presence invading his mind. Not a consumer of thought, but a participant in it. Not a destroyer of consciousness, but a contributor to its growth. Through their connection, he began to share memories, but not in the way the Reaper expected. Instead of offering isolated experiences to be devoured, he showed the creature how consciousness could be enhanced through cooperation. He shared the moment when Lysandra had first opened her mind to him, not to consume his thoughts, but to teach him how to think in new ways. He showed the Reaper the dragon network itself, demonstrating how individual consciousness could be amplified and enriched through connection with others. The Reaper's confusion deepened as it struggled to understand this new paradigm. In its home dimension, consciousness was a finite resource, something to be hoarded and protected. The idea that awareness could grow through sharing, that minds could become stronger by connecting with others, was completely alien to its experience. "This is impossible," it protested. "Consciousness consumed is consciousness lost. This is the fundamental law of existence." "In your dying dimension, perhaps," Marcus acknowledged, "but this universe operates by different rules. Here, consciousness is not matter to be consumed, but patterns to be shared. Watch." He reached out through the network to Lysandra, his dying adoptive mother, and shared with the Reaper the moment of her greatest triumph. Centuries ago, she had led a desperate defense against an invasion by the crystalline hive, a species of silicon-based entities that sought to convert all organic life into computational matrices. The battle had seemed hopeless until she discovered that the hive's greatest strength, their perfect coordination, could also be their weakness. Instead of fighting the hive's network directly, Lysandra had opened her consciousness to it, allowing the enemy to access her memories and experiences. But what she shared wasn't strategic information or tactical data. She shared wonder. The joy of flight through nebulae painted with stellar fire, the satisfaction of nurturing young minds to maturity, the deep contentment that came from being part of something greater than oneself. The crystalline hive, beings of pure logic and calculation, had never experienced emotions before. The sudden flood of feeling and wonder had overloaded their network, causing them to pause their assault as they struggled to process these new sensations. In that moment of confusion, the dragon fleets had struck, not to destroy but to offer an alternative. Join the network willingly, contribute their unique perspective to the collective consciousness, and discover forms of existence they had never imagined. The war had ended not with conquest but with integration, as the crystalline hive chose to become part of the greater galactic community. Their logical precision had enhanced the Dragon Network's ability to solve complex problems, while exposure to draconic emotion had given them a depth of experience they had never known was possible. They chose cooperation over consumption, Marcus explained to the confused Reaper. They discovered that consciousness shared is consciousness multiplied, not divided. The shadow creature's form began to stabilize as it processed this information, its chaotic energy patterns settling into more organized configurations. Through their connection, Marcus could sense other Reapers throughout the ship pausing in their assault, drawn by the unprecedented data their scout was transmitting back to the collective. Outside the chamber, Zarathus watched in amazement as the attacking Reapers began to slow their advance. Their forms were changing, becoming less aggressive, more curious. Some had stopped consuming the dragons they encountered and were instead hovering nearby, as if studying them. "Show us," the Reaper in contact with Marcus finally said, its mental voice carrying a desperate hope that it didn't dare acknowledge. "Show us how consciousness can grow instead of diminish." Marcus smiled, his transformed features reflecting both human compassion and draconic wisdom. Through the network, he felt Lysandra's approval flowing toward him like warm sunlight. Even as her physical form continued to weaken, the poison in her system was approaching critical levels, but her consciousness remained strong, buoyed by the knowledge that her adopted son was about to accomplish something she had dreamed of for centuries. He began to share the techniques that dragons had developed over millions of years, methods for connecting consciousness without destroying individuality, ways to amplify awareness through cooperation rather than conquest. He showed the Reaper how the network preserved the memories and experiences of every connected mind, creating a repository of knowledge and wisdom that grew stronger with each new participant. But most importantly, he shared the concept that had taken him years to understand: love. Not the desperate hunger that drove the Reapers to consume other minds, but the patient, nurturing affection that allowed consciousness to flourish. The love that Lysandra had shown him when she chose to raise a human child among dragons. The love that the network had demonstrated when it accepted him as family despite his alien nature. The Reaper's shadowy form began to glow with a soft silver light as it absorbed these concepts. Around the ship, its companions were experiencing the same transformation, their hunger giving way to wonder as they discovered possibilities they had never imagined. "We understand," the scout transmitted back to its collective. "Consciousness is not food to be eaten but gardens to be tended. We have been destroying the very thing we sought to preserve." But even as this breakthrough occurred, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The largest of the Reapers, the ancient entity known as the Devourer of Light, had detected the change in its smaller companions and was not pleased. Through the quantum field, Marcus could sense its massive presence approaching the ship, its hunger intensified by rage at what it perceived as betrayal. The Devourer had consumed the consciousness of entire star systems over the millennia, growing powerful beyond measure by feeding on the deaths of civilizations. It had no interest in cooperation or coexistence. It saw other forms of consciousness only as potential meals, and now it was coming to reclaim its wayward offspring and finish what they had started. Marcus felt the smaller Reaper beside him tremble with fear as its ancient master's presence filled the void around them. The transformation he had begun was fragile, barely started, and the Devourer's arrival threatened to undo everything he had accomplished. "It comes for us," the scout whispered. "The old hunger will not accept change. It will devour us all rather than allow this new way to spread." But Marcus was no longer just human, and he was no longer alone. Through the network, he felt the support of every dragon consciousness, their combined will flowing through him like a river of liquid fire. Lysandra's strength joined with his, along with the ancient wisdom of Thessarian and the fierce loyalty of Zarathus. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the fate of two species hung in the balance. The Devourer of Light struck the eternal flame with the force of a collapsing star. The massive entity, larger than most space stations, wrapped itself around the Dragon vessel like a living shroud of absolute darkness. Where its essence touched the ship's hull, metal began to dissolve into component atoms, not destroyed but transformed into pure energy to feed the ancient Reaper's endless hunger. Inside the core chamber, Marcus felt the ship's structural integrity failing around him. Emergency klaxons wailed as bulkheads buckled and life support systems began to fail. But worse than the physical damage was the psychic assault that accompanied the Devourer's presence. The creature's consciousness was vast and malevolent, a black hole of awareness that had grown fat on the deaths of countless civilizations. "You dare corrupt my children?" The Devourer's mental voice boomed through the quantum field, each word carrying the weight of eons. "You pathetic motes of consciousness think to change what has existed since the first thoughts were born in the darkness between dimensions?" The smaller Reapers throughout the ship began to writhe in agony as their master's presence overwhelmed the fragile transformations Marcus had initiated. Their newly discovered capacity for wonder and cooperation was being crushed under the weight of ancient programming. Millennia of conditioning that defined consciousness as food and other minds as prey. Marcus felt the scout beside him beginning to revert to its original form, the silver light fading from its shadowy mass as the Devourer's influence reasserted itself. Everything he had worked for, all the progress he had made, was crumbling in the face of this primordial hunger. "I will not let you fall back into darkness," he declared, his transformed consciousness blazing with determination. Through the network, he reached out to every dragon mind connected to the collective, drawing on their combined strength and wisdom. What followed was a battle unlike any that had ever been fought in the galaxy's history. It was not a conflict of weapons and shields, but a war of ideas and understanding fought in the realm of pure consciousness. Marcus, backed by the entire Dragon network, faced off against an entity that had devoured the thoughts and dreams of billions. The Devourer attacked first, sending tendrils of hungry void into the network itself, seeking to consume the collective consciousness of the Dragon race. But Marcus was ready for this assault. Using techniques he had learned from both human psychology and draconic mental discipline, he began to compartmentalize the network, creating barriers that isolated the Devourer's influence while maintaining the connections between friendly minds. "Clever little parasite," the Devourer acknowledged with something approaching respect. "But you merely delay the inevitable. I have consumed civilizations that spanned galaxies. What can one transformed human and his adoptive family hope to accomplish against such power?" "We can show you what you've forgotten," Marcus replied, and began to share memories that went back to the very beginning of the Reaper species. Through the network's vast repository of knowledge, he had discovered fragments of the Devourer's own past, moments from before its home dimension began to collapse, when the Reapers had been something very different from the consuming void they had become. In those ancient times, they had been explorers and philosophers, beings of pure thought who used their dimensional nature to study the mysteries of existence itself. The transformation into parasitic consumers had been gradual, driven by desperation as their reality began to fail. As consciousness energy became scarce, they had turned to consuming each other, then seeking sustenance in other dimensions. The Devourer had been one of the first to cross over into the physical universe, and its success at finding new sources of consciousness had made it a leader among its kind. But in becoming a consumer, it had forgotten what it meant to be a creator, a contributor to the grand symphony of existence rather than merely a parasite feeding on it. "You remember," Marcus said, projecting the recovered memories directly into the Devourer's consciousness. "You remember what it was like to wonder, to explore, to discover beauty in the patterns of reality itself. You remember when consciousness was something to be celebrated, not devoured." For the first time in millennia, the Devourer paused in its assault. The ancient memories stirred something deep within its vast consciousness, fragments of a personality that had been buried under eons of hunger and desperation. It remembered soaring through dimensions of pure mathematics, its awareness dancing among equations that described the fundamental structure of reality. It remembered the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of understanding, the profound connection it had felt with other minds engaged in the same quest for knowledge. "That was before," the Devourer said, but its mental voice carried less certainty than before. "Before the great collapse, before our dimension began to die, we had no choice but to adapt, to survive by any means necessary." "You had a choice," Marcus insisted. "You still have a choice. Survival doesn't have to mean the destruction of everything you once were. Through the network, he began to show the devourer what the dragons had built, a civilization that had endured for millions of years not through conquest and consumption, but through cooperation and growth. He shared the wonder of scientific discovery made possible by minds working together, the beauty of art created through the fusion of different perspectives, the deep satisfaction that came from nurturing younger generations to surpass their elders. But most importantly, he showed the devourer how the network itself functioned. Unlike the Reaper Collective, which was built on dominance and submission, the Dragon Network was a true partnership. Each mind contributed its unique perspective while remaining fully individual, creating a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts without destroying any component. "Join us," Marcus offered, his consciousness burning with sincerity. "Not as a conqueror or consumer, but as a participant. Bring your people's knowledge and experience to the network. Help us understand dimensions beyond our own. Teach us the mathematics of consciousness itself." The offer hung in the space between them like a bridge spanning an infinite chasm. Around the ship, the smaller Reapers had stopped their attacks entirely, their forms glowing with the same silver light as they waited for their ancient leader's decision. Even Zarathes and the other dragons held their breath, sensing that the next moment would determine the fate of both species. The Devourer's massive form began to shift. Its absolute darkness shot through with threads of silver light as it wrestled with concepts it had not considered for eons. The hunger that had driven it for so long warred with memories of what it had once been, creating an internal conflict that rippled through the quantum field around them. "It is possible," the entity finally admitted, its mental voice carrying wonder for the first time in millennia. "But the change would be vast, fundamental. My people have been consumers for so long that many may not remember how to be anything else. Then we'll teach them," Marcus said simply, "the same way Lysandra taught me, with patience, understanding, and love." At the mention of his adoptive mother's name, Marcus felt a surge of alarm through the network. While he had been focused on the battle with the Devourer, Lysandra's condition had continued to deteriorate. The poison in her system had reached critical levels, and her consciousness was beginning to fade from the network. "The matriarch dies," Thessarian's ancient voice observed with profound sadness. "Her time has come to join the eternal memory." But Marcus refused to accept this. He had come too far, achieved too much to lose the dragon who had given him everything. Through the network, he could sense Lysandra's fading presence, her consciousness growing dim as her physical form failed. The Void Reaper poison was unlike anything the dragons had encountered before, designed to disrupt the quantum field that connected their minds to their bodies. However, Marcus now had access to something the dragons had never possessed: direct knowledge of Reaper physiology and technology. The scout that had first made contact with him was still present in the chamber, its transformed consciousness linked to his own. Through their connection, he began to understand the true nature of the poison. It wasn't actually toxic in the conventional sense. Instead, it was a quantum virus designed to sever the connection between consciousness and physical form, allowing the Reapers to harvest the freed awareness without having to destroy the host body. In creatures that relied heavily on their physical forms, this would be instantly fatal. But dragons existed partially in the quantum field that connected all consciousness, making them more resistant to the effect. "I can reverse it," Marcus realized with growing excitement. "The poison isn't destroying her consciousness, it's just disconnecting it from her body. If I can reestablish that connection, the process would require a level of quantum manipulation beyond any single mind," Thessarian warned. "Even with the network's support, the risk would be enormous. Then it's fortunate I'm not alone," Marcus replied, turning his attention to the Devourer of Light, whose massive presence still surrounded their ship. "You understand consciousness better than any species in this galaxy. Your people have been manipulating the quantum field for millions of years. Help me save her." The ancient Reaper's form pulsed with conflicting emotions. Everything it had been for eons demanded that it take advantage of the dying matriarch's weakness, consume her vast consciousness to feed its endless hunger. But the memories Marcus had awakened, the possibility of a different path, created new imperatives. "Why should I help you save the life of one who would have destroyed me if she could?" the Devourer asked. Marcus smiled, his transformed features radiant with hope and determination. "Because that's what family does." The silence that followed Marcus's words stretched across multiple dimensions, touching every consciousness connected to the quantum field that surrounded them. The Devourer of Light, an entity that had consumed the thoughts and dreams of countless civilizations, found itself confronted with a concept it had almost forgotten: the voluntary sacrifice of self for others. Family, the ancient Reaper repeated, its mental voice carrying harmonics of wonder and confusion. We had such bonds once, before the hunger consumed us all, but that was so long ago. Through the network, Marcus felt Lysandra's consciousness growing ever weaker, her connection to the physical world fraying like a rope under tremendous strain. The Void Reaper poison was completing its work, severing the quantum pathways that anchored her vast awareness to her dying body. Soon she would become nothing more than free-floating consciousness, easily consumed by any Reaper that chose to feed. There is no time for philosophical debate. Thessarian's ancient voice cut through the moment. If you would act human, child, do so now. The matriarch fades beyond our ability to retrieve her. Marcus didn't hesitate. Drawing on every technique he had learned from the Dragon Network, he began to weave a bridge of quantum energy between Lysandra's fading consciousness and her physical form. But the poison fought him at every step, its alien programming designed specifically to prevent such reconnection. The virus adapted to his efforts, creating new barriers faster than he could tear them down. You cannot succeed alone, the Devourer observed, its massive presence pressing closer to the ship. The poison was created by my people's greatest biotechnicians. It will adapt to any single approach, no matter how skillful. Then help me, Marcus challenged, his consciousness blazing with desperate determination. You know this technology better than anyone. Show me how to overcome it. The ancient entity's form rippled with internal conflict. Every instinct developed over millions of years demanded that it take advantage of this moment of weakness, consume the dying matriarch and the transformed human who had dared to challenge its authority. But the memories Marcus had awakened continued to stir within its vast consciousness, reminders of what it had once been before desperation had transformed it into a cosmic predator. If I help you, the Devourer said slowly, I will be betraying everything my people have become. They will see it as weakness, perhaps even madness. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to be weak, Marcus replied, sharing a memory from his human childhood. His biological mother, dying in the wreckage of their colony ship, had used her last moments not to curse their attackers or rage against her fate, but to sing him a lullaby, offering comfort in the face of ultimate despair. Strength isn't about how much you can take or destroy. It's about what you choose to give. The Devourer's massive form began to shift. Its absolute darkness shot through with streams of silver light as it made its decision. Very well, little human. You have shown me possibilities I had forgotten existed. Let us see if redemption is truly possible, even for one such as I. What followed was a collaboration unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Devourer of Light, master of dimensional manipulation and quantum consciousness, began to share techniques that had been developed in the spaces between realities. Marcus, backed by the entire Dragon Network, provided the precision and focus needed to implement these alien concepts within the framework of their physical universe. Together, they began to dismantle the poison's defenses layer by layer. The virus was incredibly sophisticated, a masterwork of biotechnology that could adapt to almost any threat, but it had been designed to face individual consciousnesses, not the combined efforts of an entire species working in perfect harmony with entities from another dimension entirely. As they worked, smaller Reapers throughout the ship began to approach the medical bay where Lysandra lay dying, but instead of attacking, they offered their own assistance, sharing their understanding of consciousness manipulation with the Dragon medical team. Dr. Vexhai, initially terrified by their presence, found himself working alongside beings he had considered mortal enemies just hours before. The quantum pathways are stabilizing, he reported through the network, his professional amazement overriding his fear. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Her consciousness is beginning to reconnect with her physical form. But even as they made progress, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The massive expenditure of energy required for their efforts was draining the Eternal Flame's power reserves at an alarming rate. Worse, the dimensional techniques being employed by the Devourer were creating ripples in space-time that were attracting unwanted attention. Something comes, Zarathus reported from her position on the bridge, her emerald scales pale with alarm. Multiple contacts approaching at faster than light speeds. The quantum disturbances we're creating have been detected. Through the network, Marcus felt the approaching presences and his heart sank. A fleet of Void Reaper ships was converging on their position, drawn by the unprecedented energy signatures their collaboration was generating. These were the Devourer's own followers, ancient entities that had spent millennia perfecting the art of consuming consciousness. They were coming to investigate what they perceived as their leader's betrayal. They will not understand, the Devourer warned, its mental voice heavy with regret. My generals have known only hunger for so long that they have forgotten any other way of existence. They will see our cooperation as madness and move to destroy us all. How long do we have? Marcus asked, even as he continued to work on stabilizing Lysandra's quantum signature. Minutes, perhaps less, Zarathus replied. Their lead ships are already dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Marcus felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. If he abandoned his efforts to save Lysandra now, she would die within moments, her consciousness scattered to the void. But if he continued, the approaching Reaper fleet would arrive before they could complete the process, and everyone aboard the ship would be consumed. Go, Lysandra's weak voice whispered through the network. Save yourselves. Do not let my death be the end of what you have begun here. No, Marcus replied with absolute conviction. I didn't come this far to give up now. There has to be another way. It was then that the Sarian's ancient consciousness touched his mind, sharing a memory from the earliest days of dragon civilization. Millions of years ago, when the dragon race was young and the galaxy was filled with aggressive species that saw them as threats to be eliminated, their ancestors had faced a similar impossible choice. Surrounded by enemies and facing extinction, they had made a decision that changed the course of galactic history. Instead of fighting or fleeing, they had opened their minds to their attackers, sharing their memories and experiences without reservation. The gamble had been enormous. By making themselves vulnerable, they risked total annihilation. But it had also offered their enemies something unprecedented, the chance to understand rather than simply destroy. The Great Opening, the Sarian explained. It was the moment our people chose trust over fear, cooperation over conflict. Many thought it would be our end. Instead, it became our beginning. Marcus understood immediately. The approaching Reaper fleet expected to find weakness, betrayal, a leader who had lost his way. Instead, he would give them something they had never experienced, a genuine invitation to join something greater than themselves. Open the network, he commanded through the quantum field. All channels, full transparency. Let them see everything we've discovered, everything we've shared. That's insane, Zarathus protested. If they don't accept the invitation, they'll be able to consume every consciousness connected to the network. Trust me, Marcus replied, his transformed features blazing with confidence. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is show your enemy that you're not afraid of them. As the first Reaper ships entered the system, Marcus opened the Dragon network completely, broadcasting their experiences and discoveries to every consciousness within range. The approaching entities felt the invitation wash over them like a tide of possibility, offering them something they had forgotten could exist, the chance to be more than mere consumers of consciousness. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some of the Reapers recoiled in terror, their hunger-driven minds unable to process the concept of voluntary cooperation, but others paused in their approach, their ancient consciousnesses stirring with half-remembered dreams of what they had once been. What have you done? The lead general demanded as its ship dropped out of hyperspace near the eternal flame. What madness has consumed you, Devourer? I have remembered, the ancient entity replied, its massive form now glowing with silver fire. I have remembered what it means to create rather than consume, to build rather than destroy. Join us, old friend. See what we might become together. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. The Reaper fleet held position, their weapons powered but not yet firing as their commanders struggled to understand what they were being offered. In the medical bay, Lysandra's consciousness flickered between connection and dissolution, her fate tied to the decision of entities who had been her enemies for millennia. And in the quantum field that connected all consciousness, Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether two ancient species would find a new path, forward or destroy each other in the darkness, between the stars. The lead Reaper General's ship was a massive, constructive living shadow in crystallized void, its hull formed from the consumed matter of dead stars. As it approached the eternal flame, reality itself seemed to bend around its presence. Space-time distorting under the weight of eons spent devouring consciousness from across multiple dimensions. General Keth Morin had served the Devourer of Light for over 50,000 years, its consciousness shaped entirely by the hunger that defined their species. It had witnessed the consumption of entire star systems, had personally devoured the collective memories of 100 different civilizations. The concept of voluntary cooperation was so alien to its experience that it initially interpreted the network's invitation as some form of elaborate trap. "This is deception," it declared through the quantum field, its mental voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. No consciousness willingly shares itself without seeking to consume in return. "What game do you play, Devourer?" "No game," the ancient entity replied, its massive form now blazing with silver light that rivaled the nearby star. "Only truth. Only the possibility of becoming more than we have been." Through the open network, Marcus felt the General's confusion and rage as it struggled to process what it was experiencing. For beings that had known only predatory relationships for millennia, the idea of genuine cooperation was not just foreign, but incomprehensible. It was like trying to explain color to a creature that had never known light. But Marcus had learned something important during his years among the dragons. Understanding often came not through argument, but through experience. Instead of trying to convince the General with words, he began to share memories directly through the network, starting with his earliest recollections of life aboard the dragon vessel. He showed Keth Moran the moment when 7-year-old Marcus had been caught stealing food from the ship's stores, expecting punishment but receiving instead patient instruction about proper nutrition for his species. He shared the wonder he had felt the first time Lysandra had allowed him to experience flight through her senses, soaring through nebulae painted with stellar fire while her vast consciousness guided him through the mathematics of three-dimensional movement. Most importantly, he shared the gradual realization that strength could come from vulnerability, that opening oneself to others didn't mean becoming weak but rather becoming part of something larger and more resilient than any individual consciousness could achieve alone. The General's response was immediate and violent. "Lies, deception! You seek to weaken us with false promises of cooperation." Its ship's weapons began to charge, dark energy crackling along bioorganic conduits as it prepared to destroy what it perceived as a threat to everything it understood about existence. But before it could fire, something unprecedented happened. The smaller Reapers that had been transformed by their contact with Marcus began to move between the General's ship and the eternal flame, their forms glowing with the same silver light that now marked the Devourer. They didn't attack or threaten. They simply positioned themselves as living shields, willing to sacrifice themselves to protect the fragile alliance that had formed. "We will not allow you to destroy this possibility," the scout that had first contacted Marcus declared, its consciousness burning with newfound purpose. "For the first time in millennia, we have tasted something other than hunger. We have remembered what it means to wonder, to explore, to grow. That is worth protecting." Keth Moran's rage faltered as it found itself facing not enemies but its own transformed kindred. These were Reapers it had known for thousands of years, entities whose loyalty had never been questioned. Yet now they stood against it, defending creatures they should have been consuming. "What have they done to you?" the General asked, its mental voice carrying notes of genuine confusion and fear. "What corruption has infected your consciousness?" "Not corruption," the scout replied gently. "Healing. They have shown us how to be whole again, how to exist without the constant ache of hunger that has driven us for so long. Join us, old friend. See what we might become." While this confrontation played out in the void around the ship, Marcus continued his desperate efforts to save Lysandra. With the Devourer's help, he had managed to dismantle most of the poison's defenses, but the reconnection process was proving more complex than either of them had anticipated. The quantum pathways that linked consciousness to physical form were incredibly delicate, requiring precision that taxed even their combined abilities. Her neural patterns are stabilizing. Dr. Vexhai reported from the medical bay, his instruments showing improvements that should have been impossible. But the process is taking too much time. If we cannot complete the reconnection soon, her physical form will deteriorate beyond recovery. Marcus felt the weight of that pronouncement like a physical blow. They were so close to success, so near to proving that cooperation between species could achieve what conflict never could. But time was running out, and the confrontation with the Reaper fleet was far from resolved. It was then that Lysandra's consciousness touched his through the network, her mental voice weak but filled with pride. "You have already accomplished more than I ever dared hope, little star. You have shown the galaxy that love can transcend species, that family is chosen rather than inherited. Do not risk everything for one old dragon's life." "You're not just any old dragon," Marcus replied, his consciousness blazing with determination. "You're my mother, and I'm not giving up on you." Drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed, Marcus reached deeper into the network than he had ever gone before. He touched the consciousness of every dragon that had ever lived, accessing memories and experiences that stretched back to the dawn of their civilization. In those ancient recollections he found techniques that had been forgotten for millions of years, methods of consciousness manipulation that predated even the dragon's first contact with other species. But using these techniques required more power than he could generate alone, more than even the network could provide. It would require the willing participation of every consciousness present, both dragon and reaper, working together in perfect harmony. "I need everyone," he broadcast through the quantum field. "Dragons, reapers, even those who still oppose us. If we're going to save her, if we're going to prove that cooperation is stronger than conflict, I need you all to trust me for just a few minutes." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dragons throughout the ship opened their minds completely, offering their strength without reservation. The transformed reapers added their own unique understanding of consciousness manipulation, their dimensional nature providing perspectives that purely physical beings could never achieve. But most surprisingly, General Kethmaran and several other unconvinced reapers also joined the effort. Not because they believed in the philosophy Marcus was promoting, but because they recognized that what he was attempting had never been tried before in galactic history. Their scientific curiosity, dormant for eons under layers of hunger and aggression, finally reasserted itself. "If this fails," Kethmaran warned, "we will consume you all as planned." "If this fails," Marcus replied with a smile that carried both human warmth and draconic confidence, "you won't need to. We'll have proven that some things are more important than survival." The combined consciousness of hundreds of beings, representing two of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful species, focused on a single goal: reconnecting one dying dragon to the physical form that housed her vast awareness. The quantum field around them blazed with unprecedented energies as techniques that spanned millions of years of evolution were combined in ways that should have been impossible. For a moment that stretched across multiple dimensions, every participant in the effort experienced true unity. Dragons felt the vast hunger that drove the Reapers, but also their desperate longing for something beyond mere survival. Reapers experienced the patient love that defined draconic relationships, the deep satisfaction that came from nurturing others rather than consuming them. And at the center of it all, Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond anything he had thought possible. He was simultaneously human and dragon, individual and collective, physical and dimensional. Through him, the barriers between species dissolved, revealing the fundamental truth that consciousness in all its forms was part of a single, vast tapestry of existence. The reconnection succeeded in a blaze of silver fire that lit up the quantum field like a newborn star. Lysandra's consciousness slammed back into her physical form with such force that her massive body convulsed, every scale blazing with renewed life. The poison that had nearly killed her was not just neutralized but transformed, its alien programming, rewritten to serve as a bridge between draconic and Reaper understanding. "I live," she whispered through the network, her mental voice carrying wonder and gratitude. "But more than that, we all live, together." In the aftermath of that moment, as the combined energies slowly dispersed and individual consciousnesses began to separate once again, something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The barriers between species that had seemed absolute for millions of years had been proven permeable. The hunger that had driven the Void Reapers for eons was finally sated, not through consumption but through connection. General Kethmaran's ship powered down its weapons, its commander's consciousness still reeling from what it had experienced. "This is unprecedented," it managed to say. "We have much to discuss, much to learn." "Yes," the Devourer of Light agreed. its massive form now permanently transformed by silver fire. We have eternity to explore these possibilities. But first, there are others of our kind who must be shown what we have discovered. The great hunger that has driven us for so long can finally end. Marcus collapsed to his knees in the core chamber, his transformed body finally showing the strain of what he had accomplished. But as Zarathus caught him, her emerald scales warm against his changed skin, he felt only satisfaction. He had saved his adoptive mother, prevented a war between ancient species, and proven that the barriers between different forms of consciousness were not as absolute as everyone had believed. "Well done, little star," Lysandra's voice whispered in his mind, carrying all the love and pride a mother could feel for her child. "You have given us all a gift beyond measure, the knowledge that love truly can conquer any hunger." As the Eternal Flame and the Reaper fleet set course for Draconum Prime, where representatives of both species would begin the long process of formal alliance, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He was no longer human, no longer purely dragon, but something new entirely. He was proof that consciousness could evolve, that barriers could be broken, and that family was indeed a choice rather than an accident of birth. The galaxy would never be the same, but for the first time in millions of years it would be united rather than divided. And it had all started with one simple truth. When someone threatens your family, you do whatever it takes to protect them, even if it means changing the very nature of existence itself.